The king of Obara was on his knees, not before his ancestors, not before his god, before a woman in a mud brick house with a cracked window and a single candle burning on the table between them. She was looking at him the way you look at someone who once broke you, quietly, completely, with no anger left, only the memory of where the anger used to live. Outside, his kingdom was dying. 3 seasons without rain, children going quiet from hunger, the land refusing to yield for any king, any priest, any sacrifice. And this woman, the one he had left without a word 5 years ago, was the only person alive who could save it. In the kingdom of Obara, where the red earth once ran rich with yam and cassava, and the rivers were never still, something was dying, and the king who sat on the throne of his fathers was about to discover that the greatest mistakes of a man's life do not wait politely, they come back, and they come back wearing the face of his own consequence. Before we continue, please like this video, and subscribe, so you never miss a story, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? King Emeka of Obara was 34 years old, and he had everything a man of his position was supposed to want. His palace sat behind walls of carved sandstone that glowed amber in the afternoon light. His court was full of advisors who wore robes the color of deep river water. He owned 300 cattle and a library of scrolls that stretched the length of 2 rooms. When he walked through the market at festival time, the people parted for him like water around a stone, not from fear, but from genuine love. Because Emeka had always been, at his core, a good man. But good men can still do a terrible thing, and a terrible thing done quietly does not stay quiet forever. 5 years before the drought came, before he took the throne, before the advisors and the council and the weight of a kingdom pressed down on his shoulders, Emeka had been a different kind of man. He had been a young man in love, and the woman he loved had been Adana. Adana was not from a palace. She was from Uke, a small farming community 3 days' ride from the capital, where the soil was dark and generous, and the people rose before dawn without being told to. Her father grew yam, her mother ground pepper, and sold it at the village market on Saturdays. Their house was small and always full of cousins visiting, of a grandmother who sat in the best chair by the door, of the smell of firewood and egusi soup, and the particular warmth that comes when a family has little money but much love. Adana herself was neither remarkable nor ordinary. She was the kind of woman whose face you forgot until the moment you saw it again, and then you could not understand how you had ever forgotten it. She was 22 when Emeka met her, tall and quiet-natured, with hands that were always busy and eyes that missed nothing. She had learned to read from her grandmother, which was unusual for a girl in Uke. She had also learned patience, and she had learned, in the way that children of poor families always learn it, to trust very carefully. She trusted Emeka. That was her one mistake. They had met by accident. He had been riding through Uke, on a young man's adventure, long before he was expected to become king, and she had been the one who offered his horse water when it stumbled at her family's gate. He stayed 3 days. Then he came back a month later. Then he came back again. For 2 years, he came back. He sat in her grandmother's house and ate her mother's food and told Adana things about himself he had never told anyone in the palace. She told him things about herself in return. They talked the way people talk when they believe the other person will still be there tomorrow. Her grandmother, Mama Kioma, watched all of this with wise and careful eyes. Mama Kioma was the oldest woman in Uke, and perhaps the most respected. She carried something that nobody in the palace knew about. She carried a secret that had been passed from elder to elder for generations, the location of Obara's sacred stone, the Oku stone. The ancient object that, according to the oldest teachings, was the living heartbeat of the land's fertility. As long as it remained safe and known to someone of pure intention, the land would yield. If it was lost, truly lost, the land would close itself like a fist. Mama Kioma had watched Emeka for 2 years. She had watched how he treated her granddaughter. She had watched how he ate, slowly, gratefully, never asking for more than he was given. She had listened to how he spoke about power, with discomfort, not hunger. And she had made a decision that would shape everything that came after. One evening, when Adana had gone to fetch water, Mama Kioma called Emeka to sit beside her. "Young man," she said, and her voice was the kind of voice that made you sit still. I am going to trust you with something that has been trusted to this family for 4 generations." She told him about the Aquu stone. She told him where it was hidden. She told him that if the day ever came when Obara's land fell silent, there was only one way to wake it, and that way began with the stone. But she did not give the location to Emeka. She gave it to Adana. "Why her?" Emeka had asked. "Because," the old woman said, "you belong to a palace, and palaces change hands. But she belongs to the land, and the land remembers." 2 months after that conversation, Emeka's father fell gravely ill. The advisors came. The elders of the royal court came. The pressure came enormous and suffocating, like a stone being pressed slowly onto his chest. The kingdom needed stability. The kingdom needed an alliance. There was a woman from the Adiri royal family, educated, connected, politically powerful, and the council had decided she would be the king's wife. Emeka went back to Yukwan last time. He sat in Adana's family compound in the early evening, when the fireflies were just beginning and the air smelled of wood smoke and approaching rain. He did not explain. He did not apologize. He sat for an hour in near silence, and then he stood up and said 4 words. "I have to go." And he left. Adana watched his horse disappear down the red dirt road. She did not call after him. She did not run. She sat very still until the sound of the hooves was gone, and then she went inside and told her mother nothing. She carried it quietly, the way she had been taught to carry heavy things, and she kept Mama Kioma's secret. She kept it through the seasons that followed, through her grandmother's death 2 years later, through the years of watching from a distance as the man she loved became a king with a different woman on his throne. She kept it because Mama Kioma had told her, "Hold this until the land needs it. The land will tell you when." The land was now telling her. Loudly. But no one had come to ask. The harvest of the 3rd season ended with a royal council meeting that lasted 9 hours. Emeka sat at the head of the carved table and listened to his advisors speak in circles. Chief Eshi, the head of the Agricultural Council, presented numbers that made the room go quiet. 3 consecutive crop failures, river levels at their lowest in recorded memory, cattle dying of thirst in the eastern districts. The kingdom's stored food would last another 4 months. After that, they would be feeding their people from debt. "There must be a spiritual cause," said Elder Okafor. The oldest voice on the council, he was 71 years old, and when he spoke in that particular tone, low, deliberate, shaped from the inside, everyone in the room paid attention. "This is not weather alone. I have seen bad weather. Bad weather does not behave like this." "What are you saying, Elder?" Emeka asked. The old man was quiet for a long time. "I am saying," he said finally, "that I have heard something. A story passed between elders. About a stone, about a sacred object that was the anchor of this land's fertility, kept safe by a trusted family, outside the palace, away from politics." He paused. "I am saying that if that stone has been disturbed, or if the knowledge of it has been lost, then no sacrifice we perform will bring the rains. We will be pouring water into a broken cup." The room was silent, the kind of silence that has weight. "Do you know where this stone is?" Emeka asked. Elder Okafor looked at the king with eyes that had seen many things. "No," he said, "but I know someone who might." He reached into his robe and placed a name on the table. Not literally, but the weight of what he said next carried the same gravity as a physical object being set down. There was a family in Yuk, the family of Mama Kioma, may her soul rest, who were the last recorded keepers of the Aquu Stone's location. Mama Kioma died 3 years ago, but she had a granddaughter. Emeka felt the air leave the room. He knew exactly whose name was coming. He knew it before the elder said it. He felt it in his chest, a sharp, specific recognition, like pressing on a bruise that had never fully healed. "Her name is Adana," Elder Okafor said, "and I am told she still lives in Yuk." The table was very still. Several advisors began speaking at once about logistics, about sending a delegation, about the proper protocol for requesting information from a private citizen. Emeka heard none of it. He was thinking about a red dirt road and a woman who had watched him leave without running after him. "I will go myself," he said. Every voice in the room stopped. "Your Majesty," said Chief Etchi carefully, "that is not—" "I will go myself," Emeka said again. His voice did not rise, it simply became the only voice in the room. The silence after it was different from the silence before. This one had a door in it. That night, alone in his chamber, Emeka stood at the window that faced south, the direction of Uke, and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in 5 years. Not exactly guilt, something older than guilt, the quiet, unmistakable weight of a wrong that had been waiting patiently for him to be ready to carry it. He was not sure he was ready, but the people of Obara were hungry, and that, in the end, was the only thing that mattered more than his shame. He would leave at dawn. But there was something else. Something Elder Okafor had mentioned, almost as an aside, something that had lodged itself in Emeka's mind like a thorn. The elder had said, "I am told Mama Kioma gave the knowledge not to just anyone, but specifically to someone she had observed closely, someone she had decided to trust." Who had the old woman been watching? And for how long? He rode with only 2 men. His most trusted guard, Sergeant Dyke, and an elder of the court named Baba Nu, who had known Emeka since he was a child and who could be trusted to say difficult things directly. They took no royal banners. They wore no ceremonial cloth. Emeka dressed in plain traveling robes, the color of dry earth, and they rode south before the capital had fully woken up. The road to Uke was 2 days on horseback, and Emeka spent most of both days in silence. Baba Nuosu, to his credit, did not fill the silence with words. He understood that there are journeys a man must make inside himself before he makes them on a road. On the first night, they stopped at a small compound near a river crossing and asked for shelter. The woman of the house, a middle-aged widow named Mama Ngozi, brought them water and cold yam and sat with them while they ate. She had no idea who Emeka was. He introduced himself simply as a traveler from the north. "You are going to Uke?" she asked. "Yes," Emeka said. "Then you will see for yourself," she said, and her voice had the particular flatness of someone reporting a fact they have run out of emotion for. "Uke is not as bad as the villages further east, but it is bad enough. The yam harvest was nothing. 3 families have already sent their children to stay with relatives in the city. One old man, a good farmer, 40 years of farming, told me he does not recognize his own soil anymore. He said it is like farming on stone." She looked at Emeka with eyes that were not unkind. "Whoever is responsible for this land needs to fix it," she said simply. "Whoever holds that responsibility." Emeka said nothing. He ate his yam slowly. He felt the sentence settle into him like rain on dry ground. On the second day, as they entered the outskirts of Uke, Emeka began to notice things. The cassava plots by the roadside were thin and yellowed. A water trough that must once have served animals sat empty and cracked. 2 boys playing in the dust by a gate looked up at the travelers with the particular watchful eyes of children who have learned not to expect much. But the village itself was not broken. It was holding. There was a woman sweeping her compound with firm, deliberate strokes. There was an old man mending a fence with careful hands. There was the smell of something cooking, modest but real. Uke was suffering, but Uke was not surrendering. He asked directions to Adana's house from a young man at the market. The young man looked at him with a slight expression of surprise. "You know Adana?" "I knew her," Emeka said carefully. "Years ago." The young man studied him for a moment. "She is a good woman," he said. "She has been feeding for families from her own store since the 2nd season failed. She says she has enough." He paused. "I don't think she has enough, but she says she does." Emeka absorbed this. He nodded and took the directions. The house was small and square, built from mud brick that had been neatly whitewashed. There were flowers growing along one wall. Tough, drought-resistant flowers in orange and yellow that had no business blooming in this dry season, and yet there they were. The compound gate was open. A cold air from inside. The sound of a woman's voice. Not speaking, but singing, low and rhythmic. The kind of song that has no audience. He stood at the gate for longer than was dignified. Then he knocked on the wooden post. The singing stopped. Footsteps, A pause. The door opened. Adana looked at him the way you look at something you prepared yourself for, and then found you were not prepared for at all. Her face did not change dramatically. There was no gasp, no tears, no theatrical display. She simply looked at him with those eyes that missed nothing, and she was very, very still. She was 27 now. 5 years had passed. She was not identical to the woman he had left on that compound in the evening light, but she was entirely herself. More so, if anything, there was something settled in her posture. Something rooted, like a tree that has survived a few hard seasons and decided it is going nowhere. "Emeka," she said. "Not your majesty, not my king." "Emeka Adana," he said. A silence passed between them that contained, compressed and dense, the entirety of 5 years of absence. "You had better come in," she said finally. She did not say it warmly, but she did not say it coldly either. She said it the way you say something that is simply true. Come in, because the alternative, leaving a man at your gate with a kingdom behind him and a question on his face, was beneath both of them. Inside, the house smelled of dried herbs and groundnut oil and something else. Something older, like earth after rain, like the particular scent of a place that has been well lived in. She offered him water. She sat across from him at a low table and waited. He told her everything. He told her about the drought, the 3 failed seasons, the council meeting, Elder Okafor's revelation. He told her about the Akwu stone and what the elder believed. He watched her face as he spoke and saw confirmation there, a slight tightening, a careful stillness that told him the elder was right. She knew. "Your grandmother told you?" he said. It was not a question. Adana looked at him. "She told both of us," she said. "You have forgotten." He blinked. "She told me about the stone." "Yes, but she did not tell me the location. She said she gave that to you." "She told you the night before she told me," Adana said. "She said she was testing something. She wanted to see what you did with it." Emeka was very still. "What do you mean?" "She told you, and then she waited to see if you would go to the palace council and report it. If you would tell anyone, if you would treat it like information to be used." Adana's voice was even without judgment. "You didn't. You kept it. You told no one. That was the test. She told me the location 1 week later." Something moved through Emeka's chest. He thought about that week. He had kept the secret easily, naturally, without even considering disclosing it, because it had felt sacred and private and not his to share. He had not known it was a test. He had simply known it was not his. "She trusted you," Adana said quietly. "And then you left." The sentence fell between them without cruelty, but it fell. Emeka looked at his hands. "I know. You left without explanation, without a word of real honesty. I did not ask you to choose me over the throne, Emeka. I understood what the throne required. But you could have told me the truth. You could have come and said, 'I cannot do this. I have been chosen for someone else. I am sorry.' That would have been enough." She paused. "Instead, you said 4 words and got on your horse." "I was a coward," he said. "Yes," she said. "You were." Where? Another silence. Outside, a bird called once, and went quiet. And now Adana said, "You are a king, and your kingdom is dying, and you have come to ask the woman you abandoned to save it." "Yes," Emeka said. There was no other word available to him. She stood up. She moved to the far wall of the room, where a wooden chest sat under a small window. She knelt in front of it, not to open it, but to place her hand flat on its surface. She stayed like that for a long moment. "Before I answer you," she said, without turning around, "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "Did you ever come back? In these 5 years, did you ever ride past Uke, or send a messenger, or ask anyone how this village was doing? How I was doing?" The question was quiet. It had the weight of every season it represented. Emeka closed his eyes. "No," he said. She nodded slowly. She had known the answer. She had asked it anyway. "Then hear me," she said, turning now, her voice steady and clear. "I will tell you where the stone is. Not for you. Not because you have come here and sat in my house and finally said the word coward in reference to yourself. I will tell you, because my grandmother spent her whole life protecting that stone for the sake of this land and its people. And the people of this land are hungry. Children are quiet in this village. Emeka, you know what it means when hungry children go quiet. I will not let their suffering continue because of what you did to me. She crossed back to the table and sat. But, she said, before I tell you anything, there is something you must understand. The stone cannot simply be retrieved. Mama Kioma told me everything. Not just the location, but the conditions. The one who returns the stone must present themselves to it honestly, without pretense, without robes of power, as they truly are. She looked at him. She said those words specifically. As they truly are. Emeka listened. Your advisors cannot go. Adana continued. Your guards cannot go. The person who presents the stone back to the land's altar must be someone the land will recognize as honest. She paused. Mama Kioma said there were 2 people who could do it. She said she had chosen carefully. Emeka felt the edge of something enormous. Who? Adana held his gaze. You? And me. He understood. Together, he said. Together, she said. That was always the condition. She built it into the keeping of the secret from the beginning. She told me 5 years ago, when the time comes, the one who holds the location and the one who holds the courage must go together. She knew. Somehow, I do not know how elders know these things, but they do. She knew that you would be the one who needed to go. Emeka stared at her. He thought about Mama Kioma. Her ancient eyes, her still hands, the particular way she had watched him over 2 years without ever seeming to be watching. That old woman had seen everything. She had planned for everything, including, somehow, for the day he would ride back down that red dirt road and knock on her granddaughter's gate. There is one more thing, Adana said. Her voice shifted slightly. Something complicated moved through it. The stone is safe. I have checked it. But 3 months ago, someone else came to this village, asking about it. Emeka went very still. Who? Adana folded her hands on the table. Her face was careful. He said he was a historian. He said he was collecting folklore. He asked about Mama Kioma. He asked about old sacred traditions. He was very charming and very thorough. She paused. He had the royal seal on his horse's saddlecloth. Not your seal. The seal of Chief Ichi, the chief of the Agricultural Council, the man who had been most vocal about finding solutions, the man who had, in every council meeting, positioned himself as the most urgent voice for action. The man who had, Emeka now realized with cold and sudden clarity, known about the Aqua Stone before Elder Rokafar ever mentioned it in that meeting, and had said nothing. Why? What did Chief Ichi want with a sacred stone that could restore a dying kingdom? And if he had come here 3 months ago, what had he done with what he found? They rode back to the capital together. Emeka, Adana, Baba Nwasu, and Sergeant Dyke. Adana rode in silence for most of the first day. But it was not the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of a woman with a great deal on her mind and the sense to let it settle before she spoke. Emeka found, to his quiet surprise, that he had not forgotten how to read her silences. He had simply not allowed himself to remember. When they camped that night by the same river crossing where Mama and Josie had fed him yam, Emeka pulled Baba Nwasu aside and told him what Adana had shared about the historian with the royal seal. The elder's face did not change quickly. It changed the way old trees move in wind, gradually, with full gravity. Ichi, he said finally. Not with surprise, with something that looked like confirmation. You suspected him? Emeka asked. I have suspected the shape of something, the old man said carefully. Chief Ichi has been managing the grain distribution since the first failed season. There have been irregularities. Small ones, easy to explain. But they have been building. He paused. He also recently acquired new land in the Western District, land that is inexplicably more fertile than the land around it. Emeka felt a coldness settle in him that had nothing to do with the night air. When they returned to the capital the following afternoon, Emeka said nothing to alert Iki. He moved quietly. He summoned Elder Okafor privately and told him everything Adana had shared. He asked for the records of grain distribution over the past 3 seasons. He asked Sergeant Dyke to discreetly inquire about the historian who had ridden to Uke under an official seal. What came back, piece by piece over the next 2 days, was a picture he had not wanted to see. Chief A.T. had known about the Aqua Stone for over a year. He had learned of it through old palace records. A mention in a report written by a previous king's advisor, hidden in the archive room where only council members of his rank had access. He had recognized what it meant. He had sent the historian to Uke to find the stone's location. When the man returned without it, because Adana had recognized the questioning for what it was and revealed nothing, Eki had begun a different strategy. He had moved the stone, not destroyed it, not stolen it exactly, because even Ichi understood the risk of destruction, but he had located it through his own methods, through searching the old family compound after Mama Kiyoma's death, through accessing records of the elders' movements, and he had moved it from its original hiding place to a location on his own land in the Western District, the land that was inexplicably fertile. In a dying kingdom, he had taken the heartbeat of the land and placed it beneath his own fields. That was why it could not work from there. That was why the land had gone silent everywhere else. The stone was not lost. It was stolen and locked away, feeding one man's crops while an entire kingdom starved. Emeka held the final document, a survey report from a land inspector who had noted unusual soil fertility on Ihai's western plot, and he felt something burn clean and cold through him. Not rage? Exactly. Something steadier than rage. The particular feeling of a man who has arrived at a truth too large to be angry at. A truth that simply has to be dealt with. He summoned Aichi. The chief came to the private audience chamber with his usual composure. He was a compact, precise man of 50, with close-cut gray hair and robes that were always immaculate. He bowed correctly. He arranged his face into the expression of a loyal and concerned advisor. "Your Majesty," he said, "I heard you returned from your journey. I trust it was productive." "Sit down, Ichi," Emeka said. Something in his voice made the chief pause. He sat. "I want you to tell me," Emeka said, "about the historian you sent to Uke 3 months ago. A fraction of a second, barely perceptible." Historian Echi said, "I'm not sure I know what you mean, my king. I do occasionally support cultural preservation work. He carried your seal," Emeka said. "On his saddlecloth. I lend my seal to various It lowered. He went to find Mama Kiyoma's family. He asked about the sacred stone of Obara. A pause, and you said nothing about this to the council when Elder Okafor raised the matter." Ichi was quiet. "I am giving you the opportunity," Emeka said, "to tell me the truth. All of it. Now. Before I tell you what I already know." The chief looked at the king for a long moment. A calculation moved behind his eyes. Visible, for once, like a fish moving under shallow water. "I was trying to help," he said finally. "I discovered the old records. I understood the crisis was deeper than weather. I took initiative." "You took the stone," Emeka said. Silence. "It is on your land in the Western District," Emeka continued, and now his voice was completely flat. "Your fields are green. In a dying kingdom, your fields are the only fields that are green. And you sat in every council meeting and watched your king spend himself trying to solve a problem that you had caused." "I did not cause the drought," Eichi said, and now something shifted in his voice, a slight hardening, a shift from calculation to justification. The drought was already happening. Simply, you took the sacred anchor of this land's fertility and buried it in your own field, Emeka said. You made it worse. You made it impossible for any other intervention to work. You sat at my table and watched children go quiet from hunger while your cattle grew fat. The stone needed to be managed properly, Iki said. His voice had changed completely. Now the mask was down. The palace had no protocol for it, no record of its location. If it had been found by the wrong person, it could have been destroyed. I preserved it. You privatized it, Emeka said. I protected this kingdom's most precious resource. You are sitting in my palace, Emeka said, and now his voice had an edge to it that the room felt, and telling me that you hid the heartbeat of my people's land under your own crops. and that this was protection. He stood. Let me tell you what it was. It was the most deliberate act of harm I have ever witnessed in this palace. Not impulsive. Not a mistake. You thought about it. You planned it. You maintained it through 3 seasons while watching your king fail publicly. That is not protection. That is a crime dressed in the language of service. Ehai's face had gone pale under its composure. And the woman in Uke, Emeka continued, who had been trusted with the knowledge of that stone's location, she has spent 5 years living quietly in a village that was suffering from what you did. She fed her neighbors from her own store. She asked for nothing, and you sent a man to take information from her as casually as you would send someone to collect a tax. He moved to the window. Outside, the capital lay dry, and still in the afternoon light. Here is what will happen, Emeka said. You will tell me the exact location on your land where you have placed the stone. You will tell me this now, today, and then you will face the full council with a full account of what you have done. Every elder, every chief, every member of this court will know. Echi rose. For a moment his face showed something, not remorse exactly, but the particular expression of a man who has just understood that his position is entirely lost. And if I refuse, then, Emeka said quietly, I will ask Adana of Uke, who is currently in this palace, as my invited guest, to tell the court herself what she told me. Everything she observed, the historian, the seal, the questions he asked, and the council will draw their own conclusions about why the chief of the Agricultural Council was the only person in this kingdom with green fields. He turned, and you will have no chance to shape the story at all. The chief was very still for a long moment. Then he sat back down, and he told the king everything. If this story is moving you, subscribe now. The ending will change how you see everything. The full council convened the following morning. All 32 members, every elder, every chief, every senior advisor, they sat in the great hall where the carved wooden columns bore the faces of Emeka's ancestors, kings who had served before him, whose eyes seemed, in that morning light, to be watching. Adana sat at the side of the chamber. She had been offered a seat among the observers. She wore no fine cloth, only what she had brought from Uke, a wrapper of deep indigo with white pattern, clean and dignified. She sat with her hands in her lap and her back straight, and she watched everything. Emeka stood at the center of the hall and spoke for 40 minutes. He spoke without notes. He told the council about the Akwu stone, its history, its meaning, the tradition of its keeping. He told them about Chief Ati's discovery of the old records, his secret investigation, his removal of the stone, his silence through 3 seasons of suffering. He presented the documents, the land survey, the historian's travel record, the correspondence Ati had kept with the man he sent to Uke. Then he did something that no one in the hall expected. He turned to the woman who holds the knowledge that this kingdom needs is not a palace official, he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the great hall. She is a farmer's granddaughter from Uke. She was given this knowledge by her grandmother, a woman who spent her life in service to this land because she was judged to be trustworthy, patient, and true. And she was right. In 5 years, while this palace argued and failed and searched in every wrong direction, Adana of Uke kept the secret intact. She did not sell it. She did not weaponize it. She fed her neighbors, and she waited. He looked at her across the hall. This kingdom owes her a debt, he said, that it will spend years repaying. Adana did not move, but something shifted in her face. Something that had been held very carefully for a very long time. Eki confessed before the council with his head down and his voice low. He told them what he had told the king. Several elders spoke. There was no shouting. The gravity of the moment seemed to press noise out of the room. The council's judgment was delivered by Elder Okufer, the oldest voice among them. Chief Aichi was stripped of his title and removed from the council. His western lands were transferred to the agricultural commons to be managed communally for the benefit of farmers across the district. He was not imprisoned because the elders were divided on that question and because his full confession had enabled the recovery. But he was finished. His name in that hall, which had carried decades of weight, was now simply a man's name. That afternoon, Emeka rode with Adana to the Western District, just the two of them, and Sergeant Dyke at a distance. Echi had given the precise location beneath a stone marker at the edge of his fields, wrapped in old cloth, buried but intact. They found it exactly where he said it would be. The Akwu stone was small, smaller than Emeka had imagined, the size of a man's two fists together. Dark gray, smooth, with a faint pattern in it that seemed to shift when the light moved. It looked ordinary. It felt anything but. Adana carried it. That had been Mama Kioma's condition. It was her hands that held the knowledge, and so it was her hands that would carry it back. Emeka walked beside her. They rode to the place the old records described, an ancient altar site at the base of the eastern hills, a clearing that was marked by 4 old trees growing in a deliberate square. The altar stone was still there, covered in moss and thyme, but solid. Adana placed the stone on it with both hands. She closed her eyes and was still for a long moment. She did not say a prayer aloud, she said, inside herself, to her grandmother, Emeka imagined, and to whoever else she needed to say it to. Then she opened her eyes, and the wind changed. It was subtle at first, just a shift in direction from the dry eastern wind to something else, something that carried moisture, something that smelled like the deepest part of a river on a cool morning, like red earth before rain, like the particular scent of green things that had been waiting underground. Emeka felt it on his face before he understood what it was. Adana felt it too. She looked up at the sky, and the first cloud appeared over the eastern hills. Dark and slow-moving and full, they stood there in that clearing, a king and a farmer's granddaughter, and watched the sky begin to fill. It began to rain before they reached the horses. Real rain. Deep rain. The kind of rain that the earth opens for, that the ground drinks instantly, that the old farmers in Uke would call, in a language, the rain that remembers. Sergeant Dyke, at the edge of the clearing, looked at the sky and then looked at Emeka. And even that steady, undemonstrative soldier had tears on his face by the time the downpour came. Emeka looked at Adana. She was soaked. Her indigo wrapper was dark with rain. She was looking at the altar stone, where the Akwu stone sat gleaming in the water, and she was smiling, not widely, not dramatically, but with the particular smile of a person who has kept a great promise and can finally set it down. "Your grandmother was right about you," Emeka said. He had to raise his voice over the rain. Adana looked at him. "She was right about you, too," she said. "She said you would come back. She told me, before she died, he will come back when it costs him enough to come." She paused. "It took the whole kingdom." "It did," he said. He did not defend himself. "The most powerful thing you did today," she said, "was not riding back here. It was standing in that hall and telling the truth about what happened. All of it, including your part." Emeka was quiet. "Then I should have come back sooner. Not for the stone. For the apology." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "you should have." Then, after a pause, "But you came. 12 months have passed. The rains, once they returned, did not stop being generous. The first post-stone harvest came in with yields that the older farmers called miraculous, and the younger farmers simply called overwhelming. Grain stacked to the ceiling of storage rooms, mounds larger than anything the village children had seen in their short lives. The rivers rose. The cattle fattened. The quiet that had fallen over the kingdom's children lifted like mist in morning light, and children were noisy again in the ways that matter. In Uke, Adana's life changed in ways she had not asked for and would not have chosen. Word of what had happened, of who she was, what her grandmother had kept, what she herself had protected, spread through the kingdom the way true stories spread. Not all at once, but gathering depth as it moved. People came to Uke to see the village. Scholars came to speak with the elders about the history of the Akwu stone. The Agricultural Council, newly composed, without the Ichi, established a formal consultation role for the community of Uke, recognizing what that community had long known about the land. Adana was offered a position in the capital, a formal advisory role. She declined it, politely and without drama, because Uke was where she understood herself to be. Instead, she accepted the establishment of a proper school in the village, A real one, with a trained teacher and books and a roof that didn't leak, which she had quietly been asking for through formal channels for 3 years, without result. The school was built before the second rains came. She taught in it herself 2 mornings a week. Her mother, who was getting older and had begun to move more slowly, was finally able to stop selling pepper at the Saturday market. Not because her daughter had grown rich. Adana had not grown rich, but because the community of Yuk, in the way that villages sometimes do when they understand what they have been given, began bringing things to her mother's door. Quietly, without making a ceremony of it, a yam here, a bundle of firewood there, the particular language of gratitude spoken through food and fuel. Chief Ichi left the capital. He went to live in a smaller town further west, where he was not well known. He was a private man now, which was a better use of his personality than public life had ever been. Whether he found something like peace, there is a question that belongs to him alone. He caused no further harm. That was enough. King Emeka changed in ways that were noticed by the people around him before he noticed them himself. He began riding out more, not just to inspect projects or receive delegations, but simply to travel through the kingdom and see things with his own eyes. He sat with farmers. He ate at ordinary tables. He listened more than he spoke in council, which the elders found disconcerting at first and then enormously reassuring. He was harder to deceive than he had been before, because a man who has been deceived from the inside of his own council for 3 seasons develops a particular kind of attention. He never remarried. That is a story for another time, and it is not entirely his story to tell. He returned to Yuk 3 times in the year that followed. The first time was official, a formal acknowledgement ceremony, the restoration of honor to Mama Kyoma's family, documents signed and sealed. The second time was with Elder Okafor, who wanted to see the altar site at the base of the eastern hills. The third time he came alone, on a quiet morning, and sat in Adana's compound and drank the tea she made, and talked for a long time about the kingdom, and about Yuk, and about his father, and about things he had never told anyone in the palace. She listened. She spoke honestly when she had something to say. She did not make it easy for him. She never had. Whether that compound became more than a place where a king came to be honest with himself, that too is another story. Some things need longer than a year to know. What Emeka understood by the time the second harvest came in, when the kingdom was full again and the children were loud again and the old farmers were teaching the young ones again under skies that had remembered how to be generous. What he understood was this: the land does not belong to the palace. The land belongs to the people who know it, and the people who know it are often the ones the palace has never thought to ask. He had a new advisor, now an unofficial one, whose name carried no title, and who sent a counsel by letter from a farming village 2 days south. Her handwriting was neat and direct. Her arguments were clear, and she never told him what he wanted to hear. She told him what was true. He was a better king for it. In the kingdom of Obara, people began to say that the 3 years of drought were not a punishment. They were a question the land put to the people who held power over it. Do you know who you are? Do you know who is keeping what is most precious? Do you know the difference between the loudest voice in the room and the truest one? The land asked its question. The land waited, and when the king finally went and sat in plain cloth at the table of the woman he had wronged and told the truth, and listened, the land gave its answer. The rain that remembers, because a kingdom is only as strong as its willingness to be honest about what it has abandoned and who is still holding what it needs. Thank you for joining us for this story. Subscribe and click the bell so you never miss a story. Watch our next story here.